How could the initial spark of reality have come into being if there was no real time before it? On one hand, because we are in a reality, we must assume that the existence of reality is possible. On the other hand, according to this concept, it depends on the idea that this specific possibility within the field consists of being real. That is, the possibility of an initial spark of reality already carries within it the necessity of being real in order to count as a possibility, and thus serves as a fundamental, structure-giving component. One could almost say, due to the nature of this possibility of an ultimate initial spark of reality, it is impossible for it not to be real. It's worth redefining the word before without trying to explain it away, because before, in our thinking, almost automatically functions as a time marker. And that's exactly the short circuit. Before can also imply logical priority, structural priority, or conditional priority. So not, first there was time and then came the spark, but rather, the spark is that through which time becomes readable as a format of experience in the first place. Before is then not chronology, but a kind of ordering concept, a description of what must be in place so something else can appear. If you take that seriously, the question of the beginning suddenly becomes less historical and more logical. Not, what was the cause that came earlier in time, but rather, what kind of possibility must reality be so that reality can arise at all? From this angle, the initial spark is not conceived as an event on a timeline, but as the first distinguishable structure that makes event and timeline meaningful in the first place. The spark is then more like an axiom than a datum, something that, once valid, brings forth the entire geometry of experience. Moreover, this before is not real in the sense of actuality, but potential structureless. Hints that such a thing might be possible can also be found within our reality. Preliminary note, since we are situated in a space-time structure, what we're dealing with here is an indication, not a factual state. In everything we can observe, time plays a role. Yet there's the phenomenon of quantum fluctuation, the idea that even the lowest energy state of a field is not empty in the classical sense, but contains unavoidable fluctuations. Popular science often phrases this as particles briefly appearing, but more precisely, these are fluctuations in field magnitudes and their interdependent dynamics. It points more toward a direction, that emptiness in our experience is already not what common sense makes of it. Even where we expect nothing, there is dynamism, not necessarily in visible things, but in potential tension, in the restlessness of values, in a kind of inescapable difference that doesn't have to be brought in from the outside. This matters because it allows us to think of potential not as dead nothingness, but as a state lacking classical structure, yet still not identical with absolute absence. If we now understand the initial spark as the first structuring imposition, then its emergence is not something that happens while nothing is happening. Rather, it is the appearance of structure in a field that was not earlier in a temporal sense, but not yet structured. And precisely for this reason, this before cannot meaningfully be described in temporal terms. It's more like asking whether a mathematical truth exists before its formulation. Once you set the conditions, the truth becomes inevitable. In a similar way, one might say, once the possibility reality is conceived as a possibility within the field, it carries an internal necessity to actualize as reality. Otherwise, that possibility wouldn't be a real one. This also shifts the idea of causality. Causality is a tool within time to order sequences. But if time itself only emerges as a format, then cause can no longer be applied in the usual sense. One cannot meaningfully ask what temporal cause caused time. One can only ask what inner logic must a structure have for time as an experience to emerge from it. And that logic looks like this. The initial spark is the minimal structure that makes distinction possible between this and not this, between actual and potential, between now and next. Without this distinction, there is no sequence, not even the idea of sequence. From here, the spark becomes both simple and uncanny. Simple because it's nothing more than a first distinction, a first act of imposition, a first stabilization of a state. Uncanny because this imposition cannot be explained by a before without smuggling time back in unnoticed. The spark is then the limit of what can be explained, and at the same time, the condition for explainability to acquire a format at all.